Carlos, a.k.a. I am going to ditch the Mets, Correa. I don't know what happened with these agreements and outlandish craziness from Scott Boras, who we all know is just the biggest pain in the you-know-what in baseball. Everybody and their mother thought Carlos Correa was going to be a Met. Now even the Mets are throwing Carlos Correa under the bus. When you look at what Met fans were so excited to see, a clutch player, a career .350 hitter in the playoffs, come to the Mets, move to third base, put on some weight, and give them a little bit more power in that position that they haven't had since David Wright. But not only that, a guy that is an all-world defensive player. As good as Lindor is at shortstop, Carlos Correa could be better. And everybody was trying, including yours truly, comparing what the Yankees did with Derek Jeter and Alex Rodriguez. It just didn't happen. Steve Cohen came out and challenged Scott Boras and Carlos Correa. Dared them when he gave them an offer. He wanted stipulations in the contract. Here's why the Mets look bad. After the Giants decided to part ways with the contract, everybody was throwing the Giants under the bus. Everybody was making fun of the Giants. They couldn't close the deal. They couldn't land their superstar player. Made him bring his family. Didn't pass his physical. We're looking at the metal plate in his ankle. They didn't think it was going to hold up. Knowing that the Mets are a professional baseball team, why, after the Giants decided to part ways, because there was a reason, why did the Mets offer Carlos Correa 12 years, $315 million contract if you did know that he had problems with his ankle?
Yeah, pretty impulsively, too. It was like the same day the report came out with the Giants.
If I was Carlos Correa, I wouldn't be happy about it either. You offer me something and then you take it off the table because you're not sure if it's going to hold up. Meanwhile, I've played 130, 140 games this season, and now all of a sudden they quit on a player that they offered 12 years, 315. Now, this is why I think it's Carlos Correa's fault. Carlos Correa could have put his own stipulations into the contract. He could have negotiated with the Mets. He wanted 8 years. He only got 6. But the Mets were interested and willing to possibly give him 8 years. And 6 of them maybe guarantee it. But he decided to be selfish and want more for the buck. Now, everybody's going to say he made more money. He made $6 million more going to the Twins for a shorter time. When you're offered almost a 12-year, 13-year contract from 2 different teams, and now only 6 years, and it could go up to 10 years if he has a certain amount of at-bats, the chances of him having 600 at-bats at the age of 36 with that ankle problem is slim. Why couldn't Scott Boras and Carlos Correa come up with a good number that made sense for the Mets where they're both happy?
You wonder how many clauses, in addition to the ones we found out with the Twins, that the Mets are trying to put in there, too, because Carlos Correa might still have these other injury issues down the road, which I think is very possible because his injury history is very similar to Aaron Judge's, where he's been healthy the last 2 years, but beyond that, not great. And especially with all these unknown injuries, the Twins, I guess, were willing to be on the little more cautious side where, okay, they could give him the extra years, but on these terms. I don't know if Carlos Correa was going to do that from the Mets. I think he wanted more from the Mets. I think he ended up screwing himself in that case, too, because now he's trying to bank on himself 6 years down the road, which 600 at-bats is going to be very tough for anybody. That's going to be hard for somebody that maybe has to DH later in his career. It's a lot of risk that Carlos Correa is running, and I'm surprised Scott Boras let him go through with it, but I guess that was the compromise they ended up getting for the 10-year option.
I think they were more interested in going after Manny Machado in the offseason than giving Carlos Correa the 8 or 9 year deal worth about $250, $270. They'd rather pay a Manny Machado who has had less injuries, no crazy injuries, even though he's not the clutch player that Carlos Correa is in the playoffs. As a matter of fact, Manny Machado is a career .220 hitter in the playoffs.
Yeah, he's kind of streaky.
And a guy like Carlos Correa is a career .350 hitter in the playoffs. I think Manny Machado, they believe, will hold up. Knows Buck Showalter pretty well. Buck was there as a growing player with the Baltimore Orioles. I think that they will go heavily after Manny Machado in the offseason next year. And maybe Ohtani as well. Uncle Stevie's willing to open up his pockets, so maybe he'll open up his pockets and he'll have hundreds of bills in his underwear. This team is not going to stress. They have Beatty. Maybe if Beatty has a good season this year, he hits 25, 30 home runs and gives you about 80 or 90 RBIs. Shut down defender. He can stay healthy. Maybe they don't need to spend money for Manny Machado in the offseason next year.
They're going to have to get young in some facets, whether it comes from their pitching, whether it comes from some of these new position players that are being more homegrown, because the Mets have finally started to home grow a little bit more good position players than they're used to, but still, most of the roster is still free agents, so eventually that money is going to add up. So whether they stick with Beatty and they go after pitching with that, maybe they go after one big swing of Ohtani. I don't think that's happening. I think he wants to stay on the West Coast. I think the Dodgers are doing everything they can to get him.